The hum of the Boeing's auxiliary power unit was the soundtrack to my life. A low, constant vibration that lived in my bones, a reminder that I was always in transit, never at a destination. For 5 years, I'd been a ghost in a navy blue uniform, serving coffee and smiling at strangers, my own life packed neatly into a rollerboard suitcase. I was an observer by trade and by nature, watching families go on vacation, business people close deals, lovers reunite. I was the quiet space between their departures and arrivals, and I had long since accepted that role. My own story felt muted, the volume turned down so low I could barely hear it myself. And then there was Captain Julian Thorne. He was a different kind of constant. Not the hum of the engine, but the steady hand on the controls. He was a pilot's pilot, a man carved from competence and quiet authority. The other flight attendants, the younger ones, would giggle about him in the galley, calling him Captain Serious or speculating about the wife and 25 kids they were sure he had tucked away in some perfect suburban colonial. They saw the uniform, the crisp white shirt, the 4 stripes on his epaulets. They saw the calm he projected during turbulence, the deep, reassuring timbre of his voice over the intercom. I saw more. I saw the way his eyes, a startlingly clear gray like a winter sky, would scan the instrument panel with an almost tender focus. I saw the fine lines that fanned from their corners when he'd give a rare, small smile, a private thing that never quite reached his mouth. I saw the way his left hand, bare of any ring, would rest on the throttle, his long fingers steady and sure. I'd been cataloging these details for years, hoarding them like secret treasures. It was a foolish, silent kind of ache, a one-sided conversation I held in the quiet of my mind during long-haul flights over dark oceans. He was Captain Thorne, and I was Leo, just one of the crew. The chasm between the flight deck and the cabin felt a million miles wide. He was straight, I was sure of it. He had that easy, unexamined confidence of a man who had never had to question his place in the world. He was an anchor, and I was perpetually adrift. The day it all changed started with snow. Not the gentle, picturesque flakes of a holiday movie, but a furious, blinding squall that descended on Chicago O'Hare with the subtlety of an ambush. It began as we were on our final approach, the world outside the cockpit window, turning into a churning vortex of white. I was in my jump seat, listening to the clipped, calm exchange between Julian and the air traffic controller. Even as the wind buffeted the plane, his voice never wavered. He landed the aircraft with a smoothness that defied the storm, a testament to the skill I so admired. But on the ground, competence meant nothing. The airport was surrendering. One by one, the screens above the gates flipped from on time to delayed to the blood-red finality of canceled. Our connecting flight to Denver was an early casualty. The entire system was grinding to a halt. The terminal became a swirling eddy of human frustration. Shouting, crying, the frantic tapping of fingers on phones that offered no solutions. It was chaos. Julian handled the crew with his usual efficiency. "They're putting us up at the airport, Marriott," he announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "Vouchers are at the service desk. Get some rest. We'll see when this breaks." He met each of our eyes, a silent acknowledgement of a job well done under difficult circumstances. Standard procedure. But when his gaze landed on me, it lingered for a beat longer than necessary. A flicker of something I couldn't decipher in those gray depths. Then he gave a curt nod and the rest of the crew began to disperse, melting into the river of stranded passengers. I was about to follow when his voice stopped me. "Leo, hold up a second." I froze, my heart giving a stupid, hopeful little kick against my ribs. I turned back. He was standing there, his pilot's hat in his hand, his dark hair slightly rumpled. He looked less like a captain and more like a man. He gestured with his head toward the customer service line, a snake of misery that stretched halfway down the concourse. "You really want to stand in that for 3 hours to get a room next to a family with a screaming toddler?" I gave a weak, awkward laugh. Not particularly, but it beat sleeping on the floor. He looked at me, really looked at me, and that intense focus I'd only ever seen him direct at a flight panel was now aimed squarely at my face. It felt like being caught in a searchlight. I suddenly felt transparent, all my years of silent observation laid bare. "I have a place," he said, his voice lower now, "meant just for me. About an hour from here. It's quiet. There's a fire, and whiskey that didn't come from a miniature bottle, my mind went completely blank. All the witty, charming things a normal person might say evaporated. I could only stare. Julian Thorne was inviting me somewhere. Alone. The sheer impossibility of it was short-circuiting my brain. He must have seen the panic and confusion warring on my face. A corner of his mouth ticked upward in that ghost of a smile. He took a step closer, into my personal space. The air suddenly felt thick, charged with the scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp, like gin and winter air. He reached out, not to my shoulder or my arm, but to his own tie. With a single, decisive tug, he loosened the knot and pulled the strip of navy silk free, stuffing it unceremoniously into his jacket pocket. It was a startlingly intimate gesture, a shedding of the uniform of the captain. Then, his eyes still locked on mine, he reached for my tie. My breath hitched. His fingers brushed against my neck, warm and calloused, as he took hold of the knot. He didn't loosen it. He just tugged, a gentle but firm pull that drew me a half-step closer until we were barely a foot apart. The world of the chaotic airport, the announcements, the crying, the shouting, faded into a dull, distant roar. All I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own blood in my ears. All I could see were his gray eyes, searching mine for something. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through me. And just like that, I was lost. I gave a small, jerky nod, unable to form words. He let go of my tie, and the sudden absence of his touch left me feeling strangely cold. He turned and started walking toward the exit, not looking back, as if he had no doubt I would follow. And he was right. I grabbed my bag and followed him out of the terminal, away from the lights and the noise, and into the silent, swirling white of the storm, my heart hammering a wild, terrifying, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. I had no idea what we were going to figure out, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer just an observer. I was moving toward something. The drive was a cocoon of quiet intimacy. Julian's truck, a big, dark Ford, felt like a fortress against the raging blizzard. The snow fell in thick, hypnotic sheets, muffling the world outside until all that existed was the two of us, the steady thump of the wipers, and the soft orange glow of the dashboard. He drove with the same focused calm he flew a plane, his hands steady on the wheel, his attention absolute. I sat in the passenger seat, rigid with a nervous energy that felt like 1,000 tiny hummingbirds trapped in my chest. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way his shoulder muscles shifted under his jacket when he turned the wheel. The clean, masculine scent of the truck's interior. Leather, coffee, and that faint, intoxicating trace of his cologne. The quiet sound of his breathing, even and deep. I kept replaying the moment in the terminal over and over in my mind. The tie, the tug, the look in his eyes. It was a puzzle with 1,000 possible solutions, and my overactive brain was determined to explore every single one. Maybe he was just being kind. A captain looking out for his crew. That was the most logical explanation. He was a good man. Everyone knew that. This was just an extension of that decency. He saw a colleague looking overwhelmed and offered a better alternative than a soulless airport hotel. It was simple, platonic. But the way he'd looked at me, the way his fingers had felt on my neck, that wasn't standard operating procedure. "You're quiet," he said, his voice startling me out of my spiraling thoughts. He glanced over at me, his eyes catching the dim light. "Regretting this already?" "No," I answered, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "No, not at all. Just processing. It's been a long day, that it has," he agreed, turning his attention back to the snowy road. A comfortable silence settled between us again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken things. I risked a longer look at him. In the profile of the dashboard lights, he looked younger, the weight of his command temporarily set aside. The sharp line of his jaw was shadowed with the beginnings of a 5 o'clock shadow, and a single strand of dark hair had fallen across his forehead. I had a sudden, insane urge to reach out and brush it back. I clenched my hands in my lap. After what felt like an eternity, we turned off the main highway onto a smaller, unpaved road. The truck's headlights cut a path through a dense forest of pine trees heavy with snow. It felt like we were driving to the edge of the world. Finally, a small cabin materialized out of the swirling whiteness. It was simple, made of dark wood, with a stone chimney already plumed with a faint wisp of smoke, suggesting a pilot light or embers still glowing. It looked solid, peaceful, and utterly isolated. He parked the truck, and for a moment, we just sat there as the engine ticked and the snow whispered against the windshield. "Here we are," he said softly. "It's not much, but it's quiet, it's perfect." I breathed, and I meant it. Inside, the cabin was exactly as I'd imagined. It smelled of old wood, pine, and the faint, pleasant scent of campfire smoke. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, surrounded by comfortable, well-worn leather furniture. A small, functional kitchen was tucked into one corner, and a narrow staircase led up to what I assumed was a loft. It was a man's space, unfussy, practical, and deeply calming. It felt like him. Julian moved with an easy familiarity, shedding his jacket and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Make yourself at home," he said over his shoulder as he went to the fireplace. "I'll get this going. You want that whiskey I promised?" "Please," I said, my voice still feeling tight. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, my rollerboard handle still in my grip, feeling like an intruder. I was watching him again, falling back into my old habit. But this was different. I wasn't watching Captain Thorne from the galley. I was watching Julian in his own space. He knelt before the hearth, his back to me. I could see the strong, straight line of his spine, the way his shirt stretched across his broad shoulders as he reached for the kindling. He worked with an efficient grace, laying the wood with practiced ease. The sound of the match striking, the whoosh as the fire caught. It was all so simple, so elemental. He stood up, turning with two glasses in his hand, the amber liquid glowing in the nascent firelight. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine. A jolt, small but electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back too quickly. He didn't comment on it, but I saw that flicker in his eyes again. That unreadable, assessing look. He gestured to one of the leather armchairs. "Sit. Relax. The world can't find us here." I sank into the chair, the leather sighing under my weight. The whiskey was smooth and smoky, warming me from the inside out. Julian took the chair opposite me, the fire crackling between us. He stretched his long legs out, crossing them at the ankle. He looked completely at ease, while I felt like a bundle of frayed nerves. I took a large gulp of my drink, the burn a welcome distraction. For a long time, we just sat in silence, watching the flames dance. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. It was a heavy, weighted silence. I kept searching for something to say, some piece of small talk to fill the space, but my mind was a desert. All I could think about was the man sitting across from me, the way the firelight carved shadows on the planes of his face, the quiet intensity of his presence. "You know," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to be part of the fire's crackle. "I've noticed you." My head snapped up. I met his gaze across the flames. "Sir." The honorific slipped out, a reflex from years of professional distance. A small smile touched his lips. "Julian." "And I have. You're a good flight attendant, Leo. You're calm, efficient. You don't get flustered." "But that's not what I mean." He paused, swirling the whiskey in his glass, his eyes never leaving mine. "You watch people. You think you're invisible, but you're not. I see you. I see you watching everyone, including me." The air left my lungs in a rush. It was one thing to feel transparent. It was another to have it confirmed so bluntly. My face flushed with heat that had nothing to do with the fire or the whiskey. I was exposed. All my secret pining, my years of careful observation, felt suddenly cheap and obvious. I'm sorry," I stammered, looking down into my glass. "I didn't mean to be intrusive." "You weren't," he said, his voice gentle but firm. I didn't mind. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. The firelight cast his face in stark relief, making his expression seem incredibly serious. "I was curious." "Curious?" I whispered, my heart beginning to pound again. "About what you were seeing," he said. "About what you were thinking." He held my gaze, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between our two chairs. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a tension that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He knew. He had to know. Maybe not the depth of it, not the years I'd spent quietly orbiting him, but he knew there was something. And he hadn't run. He hadn't pushed me away. He had brought me here. He leaned back in his chair, breaking the intensity of the moment. "We should probably find some food. I think there's some chili in the freezer." He said it casually, as if he hadn't just completely dismantled my world with a few quiet sentences. He He stood up and walked toward the kitchen, leaving me by the fire, my mind reeling. I watched him move around the small kitchen, opening the freezer, pulling out a container, running it under hot water. His movements were still economical and precise, but I was seeing them through a new filter. He had noticed me. He was curious. Those simple words replayed in my head, each repetition sending a fresh wave of shock and fragile hope through me. The ambiguity of the situation was maddening. Was this a test? A game? Or was it possible, just barely possible, that the one-sided conversation I'd been having in my head for years had, somehow, been a dialogue all along? I took another long swallow of whiskey, the warmth spreading through my chest, and I knew one thing for certain. I had followed him out of the airport into a storm, and I had no intention of turning back now. The act of making dinner together became a strange, delicate dance of proximity and unspoken tension. The kitchen was small, a narrow galley that forced us into close quarters. Every time one of us had to pass the other, there was a fleeting brush of fabric, a momentary sharing of space that felt charged with significance. I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from his body when he stood beside me at the counter, of the way the clean scent of his soap mingled with the savory aroma of the chili heating on the stove. He handed me 2 bowls from a high cabinet, and as I took them, our fingers brushed. It was the barest of contacts, a whisper of skin on skin, but it sent a fresh jolt through my system. I saw his eyes dip down to our hands for a fraction of a second before meeting mine. His expression was as unreadable as ever, but the silence that followed was heavy with meaning. I was the one who broke the gaze, turning away to ladle the chili into the bowls, my hand not quite steady. We ate at a small wooden table near the kitchen, the only light coming from the roaring fire and a single dim lamp in the corner. The chili was rich and spicy, and the simple act of eating felt grounding, a piece of normalcy in a situation that felt anything but. The conversation was stilted at first, filled with safe topics. Work, the storm, the absurdity of airline bureaucracy. So, I said, trying to sound casual, do you come here often? He looked up from his bowl, a piece of cornbread halfway to his mouth. As often as I can. A couple of times a month, if the schedule allows. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then continued. This job, it's a lot of noise. A lot of movement. A lot of being responsible for 300 souls at 35,000 feet. I need a place where I can just be still. His words resonated with a painful accuracy. That feeling of being perpetually in motion, of existing only in the spaces between places, was the defining feature of my own life. I get that, I said, my voice softer than I intended. Sometimes I feel like I haven't been still in years. He looked at me, a real look, a deep and penetrating gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of my carefully constructed professional calm. What do you want, Leo? He asked, the question so direct it felt like a physical blow. When you're not in the air, serving drinks and smiling at people who don't see you. What do you actually want? The question hung in the air between us. No one had ever asked me that. Not like that. Not with that kind of genuine, searching intensity. My default answers, travel, save money, maybe buy a small condo one day, felt hollow and false. They were the answers of the observer, the man who hadn't yet started to live. I looked away from him, toward the fire. The truth felt too large and too vulnerable to speak aloud. I want to stop watching and start feeling. I want a reason to land. I want someone to see me. I don't know. I finally admitted, the words tasting like failure. I guess I haven't thought about it much. I think you have, he said quietly. I think you think about it all the time. I had no response to that, because he was right. I could feel his eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. I felt stripped bare, my loneliness and yearning laid out on the table between the empty chili bowls. I had spent so long cultivating an aura of pleasant neutrality, of being the calm and accommodating flight attendant, that I had forgotten how to be anything else. Julian saw through it. He saw the man underneath the uniform, and it was terrifying. After a long, taut silence, he stood and began clearing the table. I'll clean up, he said, his tone gentle, as if sensing he had pushed too far. You just sit. Enjoy the fire. I watched him at the sink, the movements of his hands as he washed the dishes.